Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have Shu Yap back to talk to us about the Venus in retrograde that's coming up this summer. And Shu is a consulting astrologer, teacher, and writer from Central Victoria, Australia on, oh my goodness, Jajawarung country. Did I get that anywhere close, Shu?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, for Shu, astrology is a way of life, not just a livelihood. Her practice influences every aspect of her life as a grower, beekeeper, and regenerative farmer. Inspired by the Hermetic philosophy, Shu practices traditional astrology and embodies a sky-centered approach to her art. Certified at the Melbourne School of Astrology and the School of Traditional Astrology in Horary and Traditional Medical Astrology, Shu runs an international consulting practice, lectures worldwide, teaches for Kepler College, mentors individual students, and writes weekly planetary news on the Intercycle Observatory. Thank you, Shu, and feel free to correct any pronunciation I got wrong there. Welcome.
No, it was fine. Thanks for the introduction, Amara, and I'm very excited to be here for my second Ishtarfest. I might just go ahead and start the presentation and we can keep chatting there. And of course, feel free to jump in with any questions and comments that you have. So today's talk, as you can see, is about the upcoming Venus retrograde. And Venus goes retrograde approximately, well, every 18 months. She will go retrograde for a certain period of time, usually around the 40 days. In this case, this year, it's the 42 days. And the purpose of this presentation is to just take you through and dissect the Venus cycle a little bit further, so that if you would like to organize or design or craft some kind of praxis to run alongside the Venus cycle as she goes into this underworld phase, then you hopefully will be able to do it in real time with the symbology of, and the movements of the planets that are involved in this retrograde phase. And what I will be going through is some important dates of the Venus synodic cycle that we are about to experience, but we'll also overlay some of the important transits that are happening that Venus is making during this 42-day period. And hopefully all of this can assimilate some good timing structures to be able to add into whatever it is that you'd like to do, whether it is a 40-day ritual or ceremony, or whether it's a 40-day practical life project, or so, you know, it can be very mundane. So this can be applied to whatever your philosophical orientations are or your practical needs are in life. So without further ado, let's start. So I've got here just a little diagram of the upcoming Venus retrograde phase. And you'll see that it starts around the 23rd of July. In some countries, I think in the States, it will be the 22nd, you know, in the evening, but I've just tried to sort of go with the mean dates here. And it ends on the 4th of September. So that's the bookends, but it goes further than the bookends. Like the books kind of spill over the bookends, and you'll see why as we go into the presentation. And so what we want to I guess the first thing we want to acknowledge is that if we do begin the practice on the 23rd of July, it essentially starts off this whole entire waning process where one is required to really let go and purge and release. The midway of the Venus retrograde cycle will be what we call a Venus inferior cazimi, which is the rebirth. And then after that rebirth time, we start this waxing process for about, you know, pretty much the same amount of time before we end the practice on the 4th of September. So that's just a very broad overview of the of what we're trying to achieve here. We're letting go of something and then renewing and rebuilding something within the 42-day period. Okay. So let's break this down a little bit further. the 23rd of July date at the beginning of your practice. This is the initiation of some kind of a journey or of a project or practice. And but it actually goes far beyond the 23rd of July. We actually begin that period in the middle of June, from the 19th of June, where Venus is in this shadow period, the period in which she will come back to and revisit during the retrograde. So really, I think this will be happening just after the conference. So really, from the conference, you can start taking note of what's coming up for you in terms of your unconscious shadows. This usually shows up in our relationships, because if we take the Jungian perspective, you know, our deep unconscious abandoned aspects of ourselves often come up in triggers that we see in other people. And this is an invitation to start that process of ownership, you know, asking yourself, why are these people triggering me? We're starting to see these not so nice sides of relating coming up, and take this as an opportunity or an omen to start exploring what it is within you that's being triggered. So essentially from the 19th of June, that's when we will start seeing that. So some questions to ask yourself, like during this time, have you experienced conflict or difficulties with people? What aspects of these traits could you actually own yourself? Like, are they parts of yourself that you are so humiliated by that you want to repress and to not believe that it might have anything to do with you? So this is the whole beginning of this Venus retrograde journey. And it usually involves this big letting go process in that waning side of the retrograde. And what I mean by that is essentially that letting go of the ego, like what the ego wants to hold on to keep us safe, to keep the security of our constant being intact, from stopping us from losing control. These are all the things that the ego is wanting to hold on to. So that first half of that Venus retrograde cycle is about letting go of that ego and that invitation to step into this more chaotic state where you can encounter maybe more extreme emotions or becoming more aware of unknown aspects of yourself. So the other important thing to reflect on, apart from the 19th of June date, is also what happened in August 2015 for you, because this Venus retrograde is a parallel to what has happened almost to the day in August 2015. We will have a repetition of that time at this time now. Okay, so we can look at physical events and situations, but also archetypal themes that you might be encountering again, patterns in relating, or your psychological behaviors that might have been addressed or encountered during those times. And you can actually go back every 8 years. It's not just 2015, it's the 2007, August 2007 as well, if I've done my maths right. And yeah, math is not my great point. So just keep taking 8 years away in August and you will find a beautiful Venusian retrograde thread that is coming to meet you now. So it's important to realize that as we start this 42-day journey, we're not only starting the breaking down process of this 584-day Venus cycle, we're breaking down the process of an 8-year Venus in Leo cycle. Okay, so this is what's really significant. Well, it will be significant if you allow that space for this significance to come into your life, whether it's through a ritual or a project. Okay. Now, the next important date to consider is the evening set. Now, this would probably be the beginning of the hardest part of the Venus retrograde journey. This is when Venus starts to become invisible, and go within the beams of the sun, what we call combustion in astrology. It's a very debilitated condition. And so we can feel an intensification of our emotions, of our relationships. Maybe from a creative perspective, it is just a creative blockage or frustration or something along that lines. And it's really best, if you can, at this stage of the 42 days, to start to isolate or hibernate or retreat. So if you were designing some kind of a journey, this would be the part where you may want to do something alone, or maybe take yourself away for a few days. Try and get a break from the kids for those that have children, okay? Because this is the time of big emotional release. And when you can do this on your own, you're less likely to project these releases onto those that are closest to you, because we will see an intensification of relationship dynamics. This is the deepest part of the shadow work, and it has a very shamanic nature. We're really going somewhere unknown and trying to bring something back. So part of this process, there could be space for doing something a little bit chaotic or wild or ecstatic. We're really drawing on that raw instinctual part of ourselves, you know, the part that gets shunned, the part that gets forgotten about because it just doesn't fit into society or into what's acceptable amongst our community. So if you can allow some space for this to occur, whether it's just in your mind or whether you're physically wanting to do this. If it was more a project base that you're doing, this is like that deep problem solving part, you know, that deep reality check, testing that the project is viable, like really being the devil's advocate here. So that if you are planning a project, this is what you could plan for this time, and expect conflict, you know, expect not so nice things to come up, okay? And the other thing that is really lovely to do around the 6th of August is, and you may want to start this maybe a little bit before, is to start having a practice of going outside just after sunset in the western skies to look at Venus, because you will see that if you start this practice of looking at Venus a few days before, you will start to see her disappear, you know, or you'll start to see her getting more faded as the days go past, getting closer and closer to the horizon. And then one day around the 6th of August, you just won't be able to see her because she's gone too close to the sun to be able to be seen. And this is a really lovely time to be sitting out there with the goddess herself and to acknowledge that this is the final closure of the current 584 day cycle, as well as the closure of the 8-year Venus in Leo cycle, okay? So that's something to consider to integrate into what you're doing. And then we get to the midway of the Venus cycle, and this is the rebirth. This is the beginning of a new Venus cycle. And here we want to really acknowledge, you know, the losses that we've been through, but also setting some new intentions for the next 18 months, but also bigger plans for the big 8-year cycle that we're starting to create intentions for. There is this sense of renewal that comes from this phase. Like, this is definitely the beginning of the better half of the Venus retrograde cycle, as if everything that's come up for you since June the 19th is now able to be integrated into your life in some way. And so here is the gift of the entire shadow journey that is, like, from a metaphorical sense, it's the jewels that were buried deeply in the ground that suddenly become available to you, whether it's in a situation, like literally sometimes being gifted with something, having favors being done for you or offerings to you, or maybe it's a development in your psyche, or maybe it's a transformation of sorts in a relationship. So this is also a time to also refresh the altar if you have one, like create new offerings. You know, we've had the darker offerings, you know, of purging, and now it's like, yes, let's give the altar a clean and put some fresh flowers there and whatnot, whatever is symbolic of your transformation. This exact date can also be very auspicious. Like I said before, it's about luck, changes of luck, or change in direction to what you've been doing, favors granted. It could also be receiving recognition, or feeling like you're being valued, or perhaps maybe transforming what you value about yourself. So watch for that, and yeah, learn to receive these auspicious blessings from the sun. And it's also a time where we can think about reconciliation, because this is that symbolic union of the husband and wife, you know, the sun and Venus. Venus is being kissed by the sun. So it's about some sort of sacred union and sacred marriage, which also could be a metaphor for one's own internal integration of the shadow into a conscious living life. This is also a great time, the exact day, to be very clear about things. Make time to sit down, to receive downloads. There's usually lots of revelations that can happen if you allow yourself that space, and some self-realizations as well. And the important thing here is to really step into that feminine power of reception. You know, it's not about always doing. It's that Venus power, that feminine power is about receiving, about manifesting. Things should come with ease. Things should be achieved through a passive state of mind. Okay. Yeah, so the other thing too, especially with this new cycle starting in Leo, it's a very creative time. And Venus is also the goddess of creativity and fertility. So this is a very great, fertile, creative time to be able to infuse something new or exciting or visionary or inspirational into what you're doing. So again, reflect on what happened 8 years ago, because this is the new intentions that are being set for the next 8 years. And you may want to either improve on some of the intentions from 8 years ago, or maybe pick out the things that went well in the last 8 years and trying to augment that in the next cycle. Okay, so moving forward here, we're now building, rebuilding, growing, and starting to emerge into consciousness. The next important date is the morning rise, and this is another time, like we did at the evening set, to start setting your alarm clocks and getting out there before sunrise. And this time you're orientating yourself to the east and looking for that beautiful bright star to emerge right at the horizon at the eastern sunrise. And so you may want to start a few days, you know, before and continue until a few days after, until you can see that first light of Venus emerge. And depending on your atmospheric conditions of your locations and your horizon line and your visibility, this date is going to change. But I often make it a point to go out and see this myself and to do some kind of initiatory work out there where I can receive the physical light of Venus on my skin and to receive that transmission. I think this is one of the really potent times. And, you know, in historical times, you know, in the Mesopotamian region, Mayan cultures, this was the time that they would use to go out to war. So here we have that Inanna archetype ready to get out there and to bring with her all of her gifts that she's received, in order to take this journey, to take this descent. It's a very powerful, warrior-like, somewhat naive, youth-like form of Venus. So here we're starting to now see our transmissions, our downloads become more external. We're starting to see our deepest shadows now become our friends, and starting to get comfortable with perhaps talking about it, being more external and consciously addressing it, whereas before we might have been quite shameful of it. So this is almost the start date to the Venus cycle, and some people do view this as the beginning of the Venus cycle. And just know that this time of initiation, you've got a lot of momentum and drive that's behind your back. So this is a good time to really consciously bring that alive, whatever it is that you want to animate for this cycle. And it's also a good time to contemplate what things or what values are actually worth fighting for, you know, given that this is that warrior-like aspect of Venus. It's really great to draw that line in the sand, like set some criteria. What are my non-negotiables in life? You know, that way, you know, for the rest of the journey, like what battles to choose. And I think this is a really great thing to do at that Venus morning rise. And then finally, the last leg of the Venus retrograde phase is the direct movement of Venus. And this is where the journey ends, but in a way it's beginning also. This is where we can start putting things into practice. We start to see forward momentum. And it's also a time when Venus has paused and stopped before it changes direction. It's like a very intense, concentrated energy of Venus. And what does Venus represent? It symbolizes things like joys and graces, social interactions, love and beauty, creativity. So we're getting a big dose of that on that exact day. So this, I feel, is a great time to celebrate, to acknowledge where you've come from. You know, you're cleaning off your altars, and this might be a time to come together with others again, to start to reflect and to celebrate the ego death that you've been on, or the big journey of some sort that you've been on. So you may feel a bit of a shift. I must add that even though Venus is moving forward, her pace is still very slow. So it's not like, bang, Venus retrograde's over, we can just like really go out and start achieving straight away. It is still, you know, it won't be until, you know, for maybe a couple of months later where her speed really picks up, and that's when the momentum really moves forward. So it's a slow start, but yet it's a gentle reintegration into the consciousness, and therefore a good opportunity to celebrate, indulge, and to become and embody this Venus archetype. You may also see some resolution of issues and challenges and situations that have suddenly fixed themselves, or maybe they don't trigger you anymore because you've done that shadow work. Okay, so this is the skeleton, I guess, structure of the Venus cycle. And what I want to do now is talk about and overlay some transits that are going to be happening, that Venus is going to be making alongside this journey. So are there any questions before I move ahead to the transits aspect of the talk, or comments, or maybe some ideas about how you may like to work with this so far?
I guess I really love that it's almost like the idea that you're time traveling into the future, because you're sort of setting yourself up for this 8-year cycle. And so I really like that idea. And I also really like the idea that it's a 40-day process, so which is a perfect amount of time for changing a habit or taking on a new thing, because you get into the practice of doing it every day.
Absolutely.
Does anyone have a question that's here? You can unmute if you do.
No. Okay, great. Well, we'll move on. And that's absolutely 40 days is, I know I've been doing some mantra work with a Hindu astrologer, and, you know, it is that 40 days of practicing it every morning and night to be able to see a shift. So yeah, it's a great thing, whether you do it along the Venus cycle or not, but I think doing it along the Venus cycle in real time makes it so special. Okay, so there's not many transits that Venus makes while she's in her retrograde journey. And I've only looked at the Venus transits. There are obviously lots of other transits happening as well. But to focus in on what the goddess is doing, she's making essentially 2 transits, but it's happening 3 times. So these are little stories that are overlaying over this 42 days. Okay, so just to pull back a little bit, we have the story of Venus being in Leo, okay, which I probably should have started with, which is this general story of our creative essence, you know, what inspires us, you know, and at the very deep essence of that fire energy, it's what gives us life. And this is where the connotations of fertility comes into play, and creativity, not just creativity in an artistic sense, but it's the procreative forces of life, the kundalini, the aspects that give us warmth and vitality and life. Okay, so we have this overlay that's coming across this whole entire Venus retrograde period. And now we have the overlay of the transits that then feed into this. And then later on, we'll talk about the overlay of your personal charts that further feeds into this too, to really personalize this journey for you. So the fact that Venus is making squares to Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus throughout this whole journey adds to, I feel, this creative process, because I think Venus, Jupiter, Uranus together as a combination is quite a creative, inspirational combination that has this idea of a reset. If we think of Uranus as an electrical surge or some kind of electrical force, and Jupiter is like that lightning, you know, when electricity and lightning kind of meet, it causes an explosion. It might break a tree in half. It might clean the slate right down. And so therefore there is this kind of resetting principle. And from the perspective of our bodies, I feel like this could be a good time to do things like resetting your nervous system. If you do any body work, you know, this is like this idea of nervous system management, like the whole new world of spinal energetics, where we're kind of reframing the way our bodies have carried ourselves because of situations in the past that have just made us hold on to a state of being. So overlaying this whole Venus and Leo archetype is this sense of reset. Okay, now the other thing that this combination of planets together can bring is this idea of spontaneity, where things are not going to be flowing in like a linear order. It's very sudden, unpredictable. And so it's important to be open and flexible to things that come up, because the sudden unpredictable forces can only reset and reframe yourself if you're not rigidly defending and holding on to a structure. in which you will break and not bend with these forces. Okay, so there's also this combination. I think there's also a strong kind of musical or artistic component to it. There's this idea of rhythm and this rhythmic flow. You know, if you think of Uranus being kind of like a pulsating energy force, and Venus is that music, you know, there's this kind of feel of, I don't know, I can just picture kind of like ecstatic kind of drumming, especially that Jupiter and Uranus is in the sign of Taurus, ruled by Venus, which is a very musical sign. So if you can maybe want to think about integrating this kind of rhythmic or musical flow or aspect to your praxis, that would also be, I think, really a nice touch. And there is some things to be aware of, like this combination can also have this reckless kind of impulsive nature to it, that in the moment kind of quality that may or may not turn out to be regretful at a later stage. Okay, and I think I'm just thinking more in terms of, say, relationship aspects, like where you know, it could be you know, that invitation to be more experimental or to be more you know, living in the moment of what's coming up for everyone. But there also could be, you know, this sudden impulsive decision to do something last minute that you might regret. And so it's not a huge problem, but, you know, something I thought might be a good thing to know and observe to see if something happens around you, and to have, I guess, patience and tolerance as well if this happens to be affecting you. So let's just, so before I go to the breaking down of each individual transit, I just want to show you that these transits happen 3 times, and the beginning date, which happens before the Venus retrograde time, is kind of like the opening of this story. And so this is all happening within that shadow period from the 19th of June. Oh, well, Jupiter starts before the shadow period, but it's a time to really be on the lookout, to really observe what's coming up, because if anything is happening a week either side of those 2 dates, that's the 2nd of July, the 11th of June, rather than react to it, it's something to consider that this might be part of your Venus retrograde journey, okay? That middle date that happens within the retrograde phase will be kind of like the evolution of the story. So, for example, what might have happened outside that retrograde phase, you know, might have been forgotten about, but then sometimes it will re-emerge in that middle iteration of that aspect. And then that last date, which happens outside of the retrograde journey on the other side, is kind of like the resolution of the story. That feeling of, you know, well, I'm just over it, you know, it's just fixed itself, it's no longer triggering me, or maybe you physically have actively worked towards resolving the matter. So that's what the 3 dates mean. I wouldn't, you know, you can by all means, you know, plan to do things on those dates, but I think like the idea is to not be so micro about these dates, but just to acknowledge that this is a big overall story that is filtering this whole entire Venus retrograde journey. Okay. So here are just some, I guess, broad delineations that I have put together for what Venus square Uranus might mean. And it's not to say that all these things might happen, and it's totally not exhaustive as well, but it can possibly just illustrate some situations and archetypal or metaphorical feelings for you that you may be able to recognize like during this journey. So with the Venus square Uranus, it's about seeking excitement and independence in your relationships. There could be some anxieties come up for you, especially about some of the repressed nature of your beings. peculiar inclinations and fantasies, you know, what I was speaking to about, you know, having these in the moment indulgences and impulsive feelings. There's this experimental aspect, the resetting of dynamics, lots of surprises, spontaneous and impulsive things. Uranus will also allow one to be a bit more detached from our emotions. So this can lead to this kind of really unbiased review of relating and therefore leveling up in relationships. Where have things gone wrong and where could I lift my game? Where could other people lift their games? And we can use this time to actually not be so emotionally invested in it. So we can be a little bit more logical. There's also this strong sense of valuing our uniqueness and individuality, our authenticity, so to speak. So this idea of like, right, I'm resetting myself to actually no longer want to do this anymore or not fall into this pattern, etc. And also a freedom fighting kind of nature, wherever Uranus is hitting us, like we want to not feel oppressed. And so Venus is making it Uranus not want to feel oppressed, say in our relationships, but also in our creative output in life. Excuse me. And with Jupiter, this is often a really lovely aspect to have. So I think we're really lucky this time to have a Venus squared Jupiter across the retrogrades. These are the two great benefic planets of our solar system. So brings all good things like happiness and graces, joy, harmony, the ability to want to unite and reconcile. The difficulty of a square, though, between these two planets is that it can be over-consuming. There can be a very strong desire nature, which can lead to wastefulness, overindulgences, laziness, and just a carelessness, like a negligence in the way we perform our duties. It's definitely not a transit that's involved with work. You know, it's more about having fun. So if you can keep that in the back of your mind, you may want to sort of maybe ease off on the work schedule for a little bit, you know, and to learn to maybe smell the roses, you know, during this time. Okay. It's a very generous aspect. It has a lot of good to give. And so, yeah, overall, it's quite a lovely aspect to have. One thing I did find is that one delineation from Everton was the hormone sensitivity, because both Venus and Jupiter both rule our hormones, like Venus, the reproductive and feminine hormones, Jupiter, our pituitary glands, you know, and more of the life-giving hormones. So we could feel that our hormones are a little maybe overperforming or overstimulated during this time. You know, something just to keep in mind. And fertility and births, you know, that's Venus and Jupiter are often the two significators we look for when we're looking at, you know, whether pregnancies are viable and things like that. You add in Uranus to the mix and there's unexpected pregnancies as well. So that's also one like textbook kind of delineation of these three planets. So don't say I didn't warn you. Oh, yeah, and the last thing is Venus and Jupiter. There is this over-exaggeration, perhaps, of one's values. So it can show up as our self-conceit, you know, arrogance, or, you know, things like that as well. You know, if you notice that around you, you know, that's something to have some tolerance for. Okay, so we've got these two key transit stories that are happening with the Venus retrograde, and I want to lastly bring in the Venus-Moon conjunctions. Now, these are just essentially to be looked at like a clock, that every month the Moon will make a conjunction with Venus. And this is a great time every month, you know, not just within the retrograde cycle, but outside of the cycle, to go out there, to witness it, and to reflect back on your journey. So this is a bit of a succession of the whole entire journey. And so when the moon makes a conjunction with Venus in the evening phase, which is the whole side before the Venus cazimi, so this is the beginning half of the retrograde journey, it will be a waxing crescent moon. But after the Venus cycle starts from the 13th of August, it will now be the waning crescent moon that will be with Venus. And this is when you see, like on the Iranian flag and other symbols in mundane society, you know, that picture of the moon with a star inside. Well, this is what is symbolizing the moon-Venus conjunction. That's how important it was in these Sumerian Mesopotamian times. Okay, it's a timekeeper for us, because especially with this cycle, it's so regular. You'll see 9 Venus moon conjunctions on one side of the cazimi to be held every month, and another 9 Venus moon conjunctions on the other side of the cazimi, one every month. Then I go about this more in my presentation, and you can YouTube my Kepler Venus cycle presentation, and we can put links to that presentation as well. We go into this story in a lot more detail than if you want to explore that further. But for the point of this current retrograde journey, it's important to acknowledge that 20th of July Venus moon conjunction is the last Venus moon conjunction that will occur for that cycle. Not just the last 584-day cycle, but the last 8-year cycle. So it's a really big kind of farewell moment. And this is the instigation of this whole waning process, okay? And then, and you should be able to see that. That's still very visible, okay? Now, when we get to the 15th of August Venus conjunct moon event, this will be Venus that is combust. So you will not be able to see Venus, but you will be able to see the moon. Okay, so know that when you look at that waxing crescent moon, Venus will be right there with it. And you can kind of imagine it. And this is part of that whole process of like seeing the unconscious. You know, Venus is unconscious, and make that a symbology for you to see into your own unconscious. And this will be that first Venus moon conjunction of this cycle. And so it's important to kind of acknowledge that. And because it's not being seen, it's almost like this is that in vitro, or in utero aspect. You know, it's like the fetus. It's not yet born. It's still not fully formed yet. Venus is still developing its form there. Okay, so then when it gets to that next month on the 11th of September, Venus will make a conjunction with the moon, and this time you will be able to see Venus for the first time with the conjunction of the moon. This is like the baby has been born. Okay. And then every month, watch for these Venus moon conjunctions. And I mean, I was going to do dates for every month, but I think it would be a nice thing for you to just go out there to see in the mornings, because it's so visibly clear. You don't even need an ephemeris for this. And even if you haven't got the dates right, you'll see Venus, you know, at a distance from the moon, and you'll know that the next day it'll be moving much closer. So I would love for everyone to start that practice of just going out there and saying hello every month, and to know that every time the moon makes a conjunction with Venus, it's reminding us what we infused at that Venus cazimi, what our new values were, how we transformed ourselves, you know, what our intentions are. You know, it's a constant reminder of what this 584-day journey is for us. Okay. Now, so we've done the archetypal meaning of Venus in Leo, and now we've looked at the transits. Now I just want to talk a little bit around your natal chart and how you can further personalize this whole journey for you specifically. So in your natal chart, you will have the house of Leo somewhere in your chart, okay? And that house will be extremely significant for this 42-day period. That house will be undergoing the journey. The topics of that house will be dissected. You'll be undergoing an ego death, discovering, you know, that point of humiliation and regrouping that into your consciousness, all around the topics of that house, okay? So if you've got it in your first house, and by the way, this is not an exhaustive list either, but it's a start. The first house is something to do with our physical body, and how we're looking after that, our diet, our health, our appearance. You know, it's also our mind. The second house is all about our money, our values, the things that we possess, our financials. Maybe it's a big purge that you need to do with the things that you own. The third house is about traveling, journeying. It's about our thoughts and our minds. So journaling would be a great thing to do if, you know, this retrograde fell into your third house. The fourth house is about ancestry, our family roots, lineage, land and real estate, our home. So things to do, rituals and activities to do around those topics would be what this retrograde will be great for attending to. Fifth house is children, your self-expression, your sexuality. So those, and this was considered to be quite a creative kind of house. And so creative activities that push you to your creative limits might be a good thing to do here. Sixth house is about how we serve others, our daily routines, charities, how we become more efficient. The seventh house is about relationships. It's also about our enemies. And so cord cutting, I thought, would be a great thing to do here. And confrontations, like looking at how we can confront some of the things that we've been trying to avoid. Eighth house, this is real shadow work. It's the underworld house. Looking at where we feel a bind to anyone or anything, whether that's a positive or negative bind, and looking at these dynamics and how we're tied into all of this, how we feel about them all, and how perhaps maybe we might be the controlling force behind some of these binds. So yeah, some really important shadow work that needs to be done if this is falling in your eighth house. It's also the house of death and renewal. Sometimes you can see that literally, but often it's that metaphorical aspect of this. The ninth house is about our travel, more long distance travels that includes other cultures and foreign people, or maybe studying and addressing some cultural issues. It also is around maybe reviewing some of our philosophical underpinnings, our beliefs and our what we find meaningful in life. Maybe that needs to change in this Venus retrograde phase. The 10th house is how what we do in the world, our praxis. What is our true purpose and our vocation? From a business perspective, it might be your brand, it might be your image, your reputation, how people look at you. All of those things are being churned up, okay? 11th house, our aspirations, our hopes and dreams for the future, our visions and inspirations for what we want to see invited into our lives. It's also how we can how we work with our groups and communities. So if there are any shadows lurking in amongst these groups and communities, then, and you've got this 11th house placement of Leo, then this would be a great thing to address. And the 12th house is that house of the hermit. It's that house of isolation. the house where we want to self-sabotage ourselves and make things hard for ourselves, whether it's through addiction or whether it's through negative self-talk, that kind of thing. So during this Venus retrograde, it's really advised to maybe find all the things that you can do to find closure to these negative self-sabotaging patterns. It's also a great time to be going on a silent retreat where you can really move away from all the conscious aspects of life and into the unconscious. This is also another house of service and how we can give of ourselves. And if it is that you are already in this life of service, how is it that maybe you're self-sabotaging yourself and justifying this as your form of service? Because we are sort of trying to address our shadow nature. So no matter how much goodwill something appears to have consciously, there's also a repressed side of that, so questioning yourself, why do I really do this? Is this really for me, or is this really for the greater good of helping another person, for example? So these are some things to consider as another overlay to your Venus retrograde journey. I do have a couple of offerings that can maybe assist you with this. I'm not sure whether you want to discuss that now or whether that maybe goes in the...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
because you have some very interesting things that you're doing, and I think people would love to hear about that.
Okay, no worries. I've only created this sort of special for that Venus retrograde journey where I can help you design, whether it is a project that you want to do or a praxis, depending on your spiritual or philosophical background. We look at all the planetary configurations in your natal chart to the transiting Venus, as well as your natal Venus, your house significations, the other houses that Venus rule, and some remedial recommendations of what you can infuse into this Venus retrograde period. It's the most personalized way you can, I guess, design this. It's not that I will design the process for you. I think, especially to this audience here at Ishtarfest, we are all our own crafters in our own way, but it's more to give you guidance on the planetary configurations that will really hit into a great design that can really have a lot of impact. So that's a special that I've got, until the Venus retrograde time. And then I have my signature sort of Venus cycle reading that is always permanently up on my site, where we look at your Venus cycle throughout your whole lifetime and look at assessing this phase that you're born in, but also the aspects and the house rulerships and the conditions of Venus, in your natal chart, and how this has impacted the 8-year cycle of Venus from the day you were born to right now, and then looking how we can design your future iterations of this 8-year Venus cycle so that you can co-create with Venus rather than unconsciously being thrown around by her indulgences, by your natal promise. So that is something that's a permanent offering, but yes, this Venus retrograde design is just for this current year. So yeah, that's the two things that I can help with. They're all available on my site, and this is how you can contact me. I guess the best way is to probably just sign up to my free newsletter, the Intercycle Observator, which is a weekly newsletter that comes out every Sunday or Saturday for the Americans, and it gives you the what's coming up for this week so that you can plan your life around that, to a degree, or at least know what to expect. So that's it for today. I think I've gone a little bit over time, but not too much. But I'm happy to field any questions if you have any, Deirdre or Amara.
Okay, thank you. That was just wonderful. And we can post this in our vendor marketplace for you, as I had talked to you about before. So if you can send me those last couple of slides, we can put that up there for you. So
Not
does
a
anyone, thank you. That was just wonderful. I'm really excited. I'm a fifth house Leo.
Ah,
so
beautiful.
I'm looking forward to figuring that, out for this summer.
Oh, it'll be a creative period of time for you, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, amazing. And yeah, for those that don't have their natal charts, you can easily get one printed on one of the popular sites, astro.com, for example. And just to reiterate, with the house placements, it is dependent on time. So if you don't have a time of birth, don't worry about the houses. Just look at the transits and the Venus and Leo significations.
Does anyone, Deirdre, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yes, I don't have any questions, but that's only because there's a lot for me to think about. And I took notes and I really need to look back over them. But fascinating, fascinating. And I really like the idea of trying to set myself up for a good next 8 years.
Amazing, great. Yeah, that's the whole point. You know, it is that bigger picture. It's not just the 42 days.
Right.
It is, yeah. It's always important to look at the greater cycle. So thanks for raising that. Yeah. And yeah, just wanted to also remind you that, yeah, there is this free lecture that I have given for Kepler that goes into this whole Venus cycle specifically. And if you are interested in the Venus cycle, that's it's a good backgrounder, I guess. And that might make this presentation easier to understand if it has gone over your head.
Great. We will make sure to link that as well so people can get to that and learn all kinds of things about the star and the Inanna's way of, I'm trying to get myself back into the, all right. So thank you so much. I think this is going to be a really exciting way for people to process how they relate to Inanna and the goddess in a real-time way this summer.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that. And it's almost like it, I think last year you talked about the descent and the ascent of Inanna. And this is almost kind of like a mini version of that whole cycle. So for those people who don't have as much patience, this might be just perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can, you know, the whole cycle is so full and rich of stories that we could really do a presentation on every phase, like whether it's the superior conjunction phase or whether it's the morning elongation phase, or, you know, there is a rich story in every part of her journey. So yeah, so hopefully you enjoy all this, and I really look forward to seeing what everyone comes up with. It would be great to kind of see
well, maybe people
what you make of it.
Contact you with what they decide to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.